This tutorial will show you how to use bump maps to create a floor texture for your kitchen. Now, a bump map is a way of creating the illusion of a bumpy surface without actually having to change the geometry to make it go up and down. So let me show you. I'm going to create a plane here. That'll be my floor. And I found a tile texture on the internet. I just typed in kitchen tile texture into Google, and I found one, so I'm going to apply that using the Hypershade. I don't have a lot of room to work with here on this screen, but I'll create a Lambert texture and assign that to the floor. And when I double click on that texture, instead of it being a color, I want to click on this checkerboard so that I can make it a file instead. And I just saved this file somewhere. I always double click when I shouldn't. You can see here in your work area that appears. That's the Lambert. This is the file. If I click on that, I should be able to find down here image name. And I put it on the desktop, but you should put it in your H drive. So I'm going to apply a kitchen tile on there, and I'll press 6 so that I can see it. I'm going to lift it up a bit so it's above the gradient. Now right now it just applied that texture once to the image. If I click on Place 2D Texture, I can increase how often it repeats by increasing this number. So repeat, I want it to repeat 5 times. I'll put 5, hit Tab and press 5. So now the tiles are much smaller in there because I've repeated it much more. And if I render this, I'm going to set up a mental ray sky so that you can see how this will look. So let me render that. So when I render this, you can see that texture appears, but what I would like it to do is to look like everywhere where the grout is, that it's actually being pushed in a bit. So I need to create a bump map. A bump map is a black and white image that we will place into this same geometry on that same texture. So in Photoshop, I've opened up this thing. What I need to do for a bump map, I can either have all of it's a grayscale, black to white. Black will be anything that's pushed in, white will be anything that is level. And so what I really need is for this grout to be really dark on the grout parts and light on the tile parts. So the first thing I'll do is go up here to Image and change the mode to grayscale. That'll take away all of the color options, and I'm going to not flatten it. I just want the color to be gone. Oops, let me change this back to Essentials. The next thing I need to do is invert the color, because right now the grout is white and I want it to be dark. So I'm going to hit Control L to get to my levels, and down here at the output levels I'm going to switch these to triangles, which is going to create an inverse of that color. Here, if I slide these in, this is going to increase the contrast between the colors. So I'm going to drag the white in, and I want it to be mostly just dark in the grout portion. Anything that's gray will be bumped in, but not as much as everywhere else. And so I want something like this for my bump map. Let's try this out. I'll save this as a JPEG, and I'll call it Kitchen Tile Bump, or something that I'll recognize that as the bump map. And then I can go back into Maya. And in this Lambert, if I click on that and I go back to the attributes for that, you should see, my screen's a lot smaller than yours, but you should see a bump mapping section here that I can also put a file into. So I'm going to choose File, and once again I double click that. It's a bad habit. But over here I can see that this file, let me zoom in on this so you can see it a little bit better. But now I have a bump map as well, and that bump map is looking for a file. So when I click on that, I can bring in that new kitchen tile bump that I found. And you should see immediately when I render this that there's a bump. Now the problem is, as you can see, it's a little pixelated. Part of the problem is that I made the tile itself 5 times smaller, but I haven't done that to the bump map yet. So under Place 2D Texture for the bump, I need to change the repeat on this the same amount, which I did 5. And now when I render this, you should see that bump happen. And this is a feature that you see a lot in video games and other things because it's very simple, and it also doesn't increase any geometry. So instead of it being a billion pixels to do this, or polygons, it's the same amount. It's just kind of a lighting trick. And I can, right now there's a lot of, so the deepest part is here where the grooves were, but because I had some grays in the tiles themselves, the tiles are also a little bumpy. And I can turn that up or down by coming here in my work area and choosing the bump. This is the bump depth, and if I turn that down, if I go to negative, it'll actually flip it, and anything that's light will be inverted. And you should be able to see this in real time in your viewport as I slide this. I just want it to be a very slight bump, so I'm going to turn it down a lot. And when I look at it from a distance here, I'll render it again. You can see that that bump is very visible, and once I get my lighting in, I do my sun and sky, it'll become even more obvious because it's based off of the light and it's creating shadows and things. But that is how you do a bump map, and you can create one yourself too. So I could go back into Photoshop, and if I wanted it not to be as bumpy on the inside, I mean, I could just take my brush tool and get a dark brush, hold down Shift, and force these lines myself. So I can even draw it myself. It's just a little easier sometimes to base it off of the existing image, at the least a little bit. And if I don't want these tiles to be bumped in so much, I could come in and get rid of this gray and make it a lot lighter as well. But the more that I add in here, anything that's dark, black will be pushed in all the way, grays will be pushed in a percentage of the total way, and white will be the same as before. It'll be flat. And so I can increase that or decrease that as I need by drawing that. And I'm holding down Shift as I click with the brush and then hold down Shift. That forces my brush tool to be straight. Now if I save this one, let me pause. I'll save as. I'm going to call this the same thing. I'm going to override the other one. So I've got my kitchen tile bump. I'll replace that. And now in here I'm going to have it look at that bump map again. And now you should be able to see it. It's much cleaner. The deepness of the grout should be much clearer, which you can see right there. And bump maps, there's a lot of different ways that we can use them. We'll talk about them more later, but that's a good way of increasing the realism of your scene very quickly.